Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard. Welcome to the patch 3.0 rundown through a tournament lens. When I say through a tournament lens, what we are going to be doing and what I'm going to constantly be bringing up is last weekend, New Year's weekend's tournaments, the Max Got the Tracks charity event as well as the Mastering Runeterra event, because those are the only tournaments we've really gotten in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So that's kind of all of the evidence that we can look at. Now, it's not a perfect snapshot, it's just sort of the level 1 of the meta, but it's the things that we're going to be talking about. First things first, obviously, you're going to notice that this patch is pretty dated. It feels like this was locked in 3 or 4 weeks ago, which I think the devs even confirmed on Twitter, because that's how we do things here at Runeterra. We are always a step behind, and that means that things like Scion got nerfed, despite the fact that Draven Rumble has taken over as the new PNZ Noxus deck, and things like AKX didn't get nerfed, and you're going to hear me say AKX a lot, both in videos and on broadcasts, I assume, for the next few weeks, and what that means is RE, Kennen, insert splash card. It could be Go Hard, Absolver, Golden Aegis, Might, you know, all those. They're 35 cards similar. Obviously, the decks play differently, but they're all finding success. And if they were to nerf anything out of AKX, I imagine it would be the AK cards and not the X card. Like, you're not going to nerf Go Hard and be like, all right, we solved the RE Kennen issue because there's still Absolvers and Golden Aegis and Mights. But the lack of nerfs to AKX definitely aged this patch a little bit, where it took 11 out of 16 spots last weekend. It took 7 out of 8 spots in the Mastering Runeterra event. And while they were different versions, it's still the same 35 cards. And if you're going to nerf it, you are going to nerf somewhere within that 35. So, yeah, that's sort of the main highlight. Is no AKX nerfs, a little aloof on the Scion nerfs. And then the other 2 decks that were performing very well in both events were Pantheon Shyvana, which also got no nerfs, but that's fine. People were speculating about Wounded White Flame, didn't happen. That's fine. Shyvana Targon has always sort of settled out at like a top 3, top 5 deck when it's present in the meta, and I think it's just going to do the same here, right? It's not going to be like oppressive, it's just we found a good champion and a nice package that fits with the dragon stuff, and then TF Nami Shellfolk, which is obviously the one deck that did take some nerfs, because that one was sort of a known factor 4 weeks ago, whereas the Pantheon decks were still being figured out. People were, I think Mono Pantheon was the big one when they sort of locked this patch in, so makes sense that it wasn't really doing numbers where you want to nerf it, but there's also a lot of speculation about, is there going to be another B patch, because that's something that they did last month, and obviously decks like AKX exist, and are arguably the best performing tournament deck in the game right now. Well, that's inarguable, that's a fact, but you know, you could argue that it is just the best deck in the game right now. And maybe we'll get a B patch for that. And it's left a couple players wondering. I am going to operate under the assumption that we are not getting a B patch, and I'm just going to hard commit to that and run with it. And if we get a B patch, I will be pleasantly surprised, but I'm going to be honest, this doesn't affect me that much. So now with this massive preamble out of the way, let us actually get into the patch notes. So obviously Scion hasn't really been anywhere for a while, and this is reminiscent of the Draven nerf, where Draven Scion and Draven Ezreal just like really weren't performing at the time that Draven got nerfed. It was a little bit of a weird timing thing, but I'm not too upset about this, right? Because eventually I feel like if left unchanged, Scion would have come back into a form, either through a meta shift or through some new cards, where Scion just took over the game again. And I'm not upset at the fact that we're sort of preventing that by preemptively nerfing it. It wasn't really being played anyway, so like I doubt it's going to see any more play now. But ultimately, like, this has no impact on the tournament landscape. No one has been running Scion for a few weeks now. I don't think anyone's really going to look at the buffs that we got and say, okay, now's a great time to make a new Scion deck. Maybe we're taking a preventative measure against that, but ultimately this has zero impact on the tournament scene. Ashe is a deck that's extremely meta dependent, and I don't think the like upping the Frostbite really helps. There were some buffs in the patch that almost looked to facilitate a dedicated Ashe strategy, but ultimately I don't think Frostbite midrange is doing anything with this change. I think it's just very meta dependent, and right now the meta is a lot faster than something like Frostbite midrange is going to be able to deal with. And some of the buffs in this patch even try to combat that fast meta with a more control-y one, which is also not a great environment for Frostbite midrange. So this Ashe level, like this Ashe change is nice, but it's nothing. Trundle, on the other hand, is pretty impactful. We have learned time and time again that 5 mana units with 6 health, especially ones with regen, are very, very good. Trundle was a 4/6 on release, now buffed back to his original stats, and this does facilitate some interesting strategies. Braum Swain is sort of a sleeper deck at the moment that players have really started to pick up on, and it is possible that Trundle Swain is a better version of that now with this buff, especially since Monster Harpoon was just nerfed. We're probably going to see a decrease in playability of that, so like you already take the one card that was sniping out Trundle, you move it out of the meta. People are looking at Shellfolk as this now, oh, it's a 4 health unit, I don't really have to play this 5 damage and 6 damage removal and these things that deal with the big threats, and now Trundle has a little bit more wiggle room than it previously did. I can't speak to any specific deck that jumps out to me that this Trundle change is going to like have a big impact for. Obviously, Feel the Rush exists and is happy about this, but I don't think Trundle gaining 1 additional health is doing for Feel the Rush what it is going to do for other Trundle decks potentially. Ultimately, like, this is a pretty good change. I'm a little scared for it because, you know, it was very broken at the time that it happened, but that was over a year ago. So we'll see how it's a good baseline, right? Where, like, if you want to start undoing nerfs from a year ago, Aurelion Sol sort of paved the way for that when they put him back to the 20 level up, and since then Asol hasn't had like a huge spike in playability, so it's reasonable to think that people might be overreacting to this Trundle change. You can clip that and spread it all over Twitter if I'm wrong about that, because it's a little out of context, but hey, it's good clickbait, so that's a freebie from me to you. This is where it gets sort of even more confusing, where Anivia is another big like facilitator of the Shadow Isle Furtherward strategy, and when Anivia and TLC are equally viable, it usually ends up coming down to player preference. You don't really see one taking over the meta in a bigger way than the other. It really comes down to like generally a relatively even split of the two depending on player preference. So if TLC is good, then Anivia is probably good, but only time will tell on that one. With AKX existing in the current state, with a couple of the other things that I think might pop out of this patch, I'm not super optimistic for Shadow Isle Freljord, and I would imagine people are going to go more for a Trundle style of gameplay than Anivia. Now, Kindred is an interesting one, because at worst, a 4-mana 4/3 quick attack that decentivizes chump blocking is pretty good on paper. And obviously, the curve has always been a little bit awkward for some of the decks that Kindred wants to be playing in. Kindred Viego is something that was called out. Of course, Kindred Vi as well for these Sentinel control decks is something that I think a lot of players are going to be looking towards. And ultimately, what stands out to me immediately is going to be Sentinel control, because that's a deck that's been sort of fringe playable. I'd probably call it like tier 3. We've seen people bring it to tournaments before, find mixed success with it. You'll see it pop up in like every 3 top 8s or so. It'll probably top 32 the seasonal, and whether or not it has Kindred is a pretty big question mark to me. Kindred has reached the meme tier level that Yasuo has, where it's difficult to analyze, because if you say it's going to be good, you know, you're on copium like you have been the last 6 times that it looked like Kindred was going to be good. But because it is so beloved by the community for its meme status, if Kindred can be good, people are going to figure it out, because everybody and their mom is going to be throwing Kindred ideas at the wall to see what sticks. So Kindred I'm a little optimistic for in Sentinel control specifically. Maybe a new archetype comes out. Maybe Kindred replaces Thresh in the Viego deck, because you don't really like having 2 champions that cost the same amount unless one is sort of baiting for the other, kind of like old Karma Heimer when they were both 5 mana. So yeah, optimistic for Kindred. More optimistic for Kindred than Anivia, dare I say. Initially, I really liked the look of the Maokai change, but the more I think about it, the more I'm kind of like toning down on it. And the main reason is I think this is like okay for deep. Really, the only thing they have to take advantage of this is Vile Feast, both in terms of A, summoning something on the turn that you play the Maokai, and B, summoning something in response to the death of your Maokai. And when we look at all of the cards in Runeterra that summon units at burst and fast speed, they all kind of suck and are probably not fitting into a Maokai deck. Vile Feast is really the only good one that I can think of off the top of my head. And in case I can't think of anything off the top of my head, oh look, I actually brought up a list. Obviously, Concussive Palm is probably one of the better ones. Risen Mists obviously fits the bill for the regional combination a little bit better, but when we're looking at cards that just say summon and are fast or burst speed for purposes of either summoning a sapling the turn that you play Maokai or doing it in response to Maokai dying, it's like Vile Feast, Arise, Conch Palm, Risen Mists, arguably go get it on a different unit. But that's obviously not happening on the same turn that Maokai comes down, as is Risen Mist and Concussive Palm. So, like, Vile Feast is everybody's, oh man, yeah, that's the one. And it turns out, when you dig a little deeper, it's still the only one. So that just kind of is what it is. But with the Iceborn Legacy buff, you know, maybe we see the return of Maokai, Sapling, Spider, Iceborn, like Maokai, Legacy, and Door. And maybe that's the starting point, and then that evolves into something real, because I don't think that concept specifically is real, but I think it might actually be the starting point for one of those strategies to branch out a little bit further and find something good. Because there's a decent amount of sapling generation between Maokai, Sapling Toss, and Blighted Caretaker that you might be able to Iceborn Legacy a sapling and not feel terrible about it, but you're probably going for Spiderlings, and we'll see how that goes. I think it's a really cool concept. I think like Maokai has never really had a great time in the competitive landscape. Homecoming is not super effective against Maokai, and honestly, there's not a lot of removal in the top decks right now, and I think that free challengers from Maokai are a great way to try to clean up the board of something like AKX. and even just Nami Shellfolk without committing resources. So I think that we might be able to make like a counter AKX Maokai deck. Like, that sounds not impossible to me. Is it going to work out that way? Only time's going to tell, and I'm not going to be the one to figure it out. The Darius change means nothing. The only thing that the Darius change actually does is it makes people look at Darius again. And the only deck that's being run right now that Darius is going to potentially slot into is probably Spider aggro. And I feel like if people put Darius in Spiders and it does well, 6-5 Darius would have done just as well. And just nobody thought to put Darius in because he's almost a meme tier champion. So, you know, we put him in again because he got buffed, and it turns out it was good. And the answer was actually that it was just good the entire time. So, whatever, Darius. Now, call me ignorant here, but I feel like the Diana change actually doesn't matter too much for Nightfall. I feel like for the most part, Nightfall is getting down a leveled Diana more often than not. Maybe it matters for like one turn, but this to me reads more like a change that matters for non-Nightfall Diana decks, ones that were having a little bit of difficulty actually leveling the Diana because they didn't play her for her level up, they just played her as essentially a Mystic Shot. She's going to Mystic Shot more often now, which is good, but I don't know that this is like pushing Diana over the top to take the spot over any other champion that you're going to be running. Like, obviously this is still not better than Zoe, but if the sapling strategy works out for Maokai in terms of like, oh, I just consistently challenge your units to like bait out your recalls in order to then more effectively pick off your units with removal a little bit later on, then Diana does run along a similar vein of being like a recurring sapling. She'll probably have to be a 3-3, it'll probably be a little bit more inconsistent, and I say a 3-3 because like you're going to Pale Cascade, because what other Nightfall card are you playing, and then all the Dianas in your hand turn into Pale Cascades, so like, we're just Pale Cascading, and then turning her into a 3-3 challenger every turn, which like, doesn't sound bad if you can find a way to consistently run that out, but ultimately I don't really see the Diana change doing too much. There's no Targon deck that I can think of that's anywhere near the meta that Diana would easily slot into. Maybe the Ruben pile, but I think Zoe and Vi kind of have a tight lock on that one, so yeah, you know, maybe I'm missing something here, but again, I don't, like, even if Nightfall comes back, I don't think this Diana change is coming up in, like, that many Nightfall games, but I don't really play Nightfall, so I might be wrong on that one. Sometimes I have to talk out of my ass. I don't play every deck in the game. The Xerath change is very big, though, because the landmark deck, and I don't necessarily know if it is Ziggs, Talia, Xerath, two of those three are in it, and I don't know which build is performing most admirably. My gut says the one without Xerath, but, you know, with this change, it might be a little bit better. Because one of the things to always consider is, like, not only, A, where do you dodge removal, which obviously 3 to 4 health is one of the biggest changes you can make in Legends of Runeterra. We've seen multiple cards go from unplayable to complete viability based off of a buff from 3 to 4 HP. Not only because it makes it outside of the range of things like Get Excited or some fumes, but also because now you can more effectively chump block something and then not die to like a Mystic Shot or a Pokey Stick. And there's a lot of merit to that. So I'm very optimistic for the Xerath change. If the landmark deck was looking for something to put it over the top, it was Xerath. Assuming that they run Xerath, because that is a deck that, like, I really haven't dug my claws into as much as I wish I had. I don't, like I said, I don't know if it's Zig Xerath, Zig Zillion, Xerath, Talia Ziggs. I think I named one of those twice, but you get the gist. But I really like the Xerath change, and I'm hoping that landmarks become a little bit more prominent because of it. I don't know what their matchup charts were looking like in terms of what they're playing into in the meta right now, but I do think that Xerath's ability is very strong into the style of decks that are at the top of the meta right now. And if you're still running like Shurima Vandal City, Minimorph is a great tool against you know, the Pantheon Shyvana decks, as well as the Shellfolk decks that are inevitably going to stick around. And yeah, ultimately very, very excited for the Xerath change. So while Mare decks in general aren't the most popular in a tournament setting right now, Yordles in Arms is still something that is seeing a pretty good amount of success. Shadox did win the charity tournament with Yordles in Arms, and a big reason for that is Vandal City Mare, because you still have Yordle Captain, who is still going to be buffing up these things that are smaller than it, and Vandal City Mare gives you a lot of leeway to go wide with those things. Now, on top of the fact that, like, Bomber Twins was in that main deck, not only to facilitate Yordles in Arms itself, because I think people sometimes forget that you do have to play 4 regions worth of cards in order to get that to the +4/+4, but the Mare was just doing so much in a deck like that, and I think everybody was really hoping for some kind of nerf to it, and this is exactly what the people wanted. Not super relevant for the tournament landscape. It does knock Yordles in Arms down a peg, which is unfortunate because, like, that deck wasn't doing a whole lot. Like, it won this one tournament, this one weekend, but I don't know if it was going to continue to win tournaments on continuous weekends, but I hate the Yordles in Arms archetype, so good riddance, Vandal City Mare. Shellfolk, I actually don't have, like, an insane amount to say on. I think that TF Nami took more than a few hits this patch, and Shellfolk, I don't even know if this is the biggest one. because that deck gets to play a little bit of a different game because it has so many different win conditions. Like if they have Nami or TF already on field, they can kind of play the pass game against your removal into Shellfolk, and will do so a little bit more carefully now. And they're kind of fine with that because either they're like producing Nami value or drawing cards towards a TF level up. I don't think the Shellfolk nerf is the biggest nerf that deck took. More dedicated Shellfolk decks, though, were pretty absent from the meta outside of very specifically Icado, and I don't really have much to say on like the Lux Shellfolk deck or whatever other Fizz deck he's been running, because Icado seems to be the only person that is currently like workshopping Shellfolk and having tournament success with it. So we'll see if he continues to bring out the Shellfolk decks, but like rather than give you some long-winded answer on Shellfolk, like I'm just gonna look at what Icado does and kind of draw my conclusion from there. But ultimately, I'm relatively happy with the Shellfolk nerf. Honestly, I wish it was a little bit harder. I know this is a card that Ruben on one of his streams had said they didn't think Shellfolk was going to be competitively viable, so I was kind of hoping that they were just going to double down on that and be like, well, now it can no longer be competitively viable, and just like completely change the card or something, but they didn't do that, and that's fine, because people really like this kind of thing. But ultimately, I think TF Nami is still going to be a competitively viable deck, just definitely not nowhere near the power level that it is now, which is what you want, right? But I don't think that's as much the Shellfolk nerf as some of the other ones. Very happy about the Lecturing Yordle change, because this is a card that really has just been starting to get splashed in just about anything Vandal City, regardless of whether or not it synergizes. This is an unfortunate hit at TF's... No, not TF. Teemo Swain. Because that's a deck that I'm a big fan of, and I think it's a very fair deck, and I like seeing Swain back in the meta, but it looks like that one has fallen off a bit, and with Lecturing Yordle taking a nerf, it's going to continue to fall off, as is Vandal Pirates, which is another deck that, like, just we haven't seen too much, and Monster Harpoon, another one that's going to continue to offset Vandal Pirates. And, like, Vandal Pirates got hurt this patch, man. They didn't deserve it, but they got residually fucked. And that's unfortunate for people who like Vandal Pirates, but I'm not one of them, so... But yeah, I mean, this is a good Lecturing Yordle change. I really like that they kept the body around, because I think that it is nice to have these 4-mana 3/5s, and I would like to see even more 4-mana cards sort of move in that direction. It was just doing a little bit too much, and I think this change is going to be really nice in terms of sort of weakening it on your off turn, facilitating decisions around open attacking a little bit more often. The Vandal City decks weren't really doing super hot in the meta. Like I had mentioned, the top 3 decks were like AKX, Pantheon Shyvana, and TF Nami, and I don't think TF Nami was running Lecturing Yordle, at least not en masse, so yeah, it's a fine change. This card was a little overtuned, so that's nice. Monster Harpoon, you can no longer Nopify it, and that's a big deal. We've seen that come in big with like Relentless Pursuit, but ultimately Monster Harpoon did probably need a nerf, and it's one of the main things that people talk about when we're talking about things that can kill Shellfolk on 6, so... You know, we'll see how this works out, but, like, I don't think I don't think the play rate of Monster Harpoon is going down. I think it just feels worse when you play it, but I think the play rate's going to stay the same. It's a pretty good change, I think. So these are the 2 changes that were kind of out of the blue for a lot of people, myself included, but I really like them, and I think these 2 changes are what really push something like TLC over Anivia for me. And obviously these are great cards for Targon's Peak as well, so we'll see what kind of comes of that, because... I think Targon's Peak is usually Tryndamere and Aurelian Soul. So, like, you could even get, like, Targon's Peak and then some kind of Trundle X deck. Like, even just, like, Mono Trundle Ladros TLC style of gameplay. So, like, we might actually get into a point where you can run multiple decks that are playing It That Stares and Voices the Old One. Because outside of the Ahri matchup, I don't think you're really taking a whole lot of L's. And because we are talking tournament specifically, you can always just ban the Ahri deck. Because they only brought one Ahri deck. With Yordles and Arms taking a bit of a hit between Vandal City Mayor, and I don't even know if they played Lecturing Yordle for the most part. I don't think they really did. Yeah, you know, maybe you actually do have a solid foothold in the meta, especially with, you know, It That Stares going up on the damage, but also just because the card got better, it feels better to play, and that means we have easier access to landmark removal, which is something that a lot of decks struggle with, and Control has always had a little bit of a tougher time dealing with something like Vandal Tree, so if you can reasonably put It That Stares in your deck, you're going to feel pretty good about that. And ultimately, yeah, I'm a big fan of these changes. The Voices one really doesn't matter nearly as much as the It That Stares one does, but I think you're still going to feel happy to put it in your deck, and, you know, it'll be hard to tell if that one extra dig did help, but, you know, it's one of those, like, quality of life things where, like, Monster Harpoon's going to feel worse every time you play it, Voices is just going to feel better every time you play it, but ultimately I think the It That Stares change, if any, is going to be the one that really pushes these kinds of decks over the top. Okay, Rime Tusk Shaman, I know I had mentioned that, like, 3 to 4 health is the biggest buff that you can give a card in the game, but Rime Tusk Shaman still sucks. Iceborn Legacy, on the other hand, does not suck, and I think the 2 big things that everybody's talking about when it comes to Iceborn Legacy is Spiderlings and Daring Poros. Now, Daring Poros, are obviously the scarier, probably more competitive one, especially given their ability to just like block the elusives that AKX is putting out, as well as sort of aggro down the Pantheon decks by just going through them and around them. So ultimately, like, Daring Poro Iceborn Legacy does sound a little scary. Now, it is possible that the mana cost is just a bit too high to facilitate something like that. The deck building is going to be a little bit awkward at first. I'd probably just look at whatever Swim is doing, because I don't think anybody in the scene has put more hours on Poros than Swim has. So listen to him on whether or not Iceborn Legacy is going to be good. For Poros, at least. Then I had mentioned, the potential of like this Iceborn Legacy Maokai Indoor Spider deck. I still think that's like a decent starting point, but I would imagine that Indoor might end up getting cut first because of its weakness to Homecoming and Hush and Mini-Morph. Just the deck, like every top deck has a way to deal with Indoor, but the go wide strategy isn't something that they deal with as well. So maybe you find time to cast Iceborn Legacy. It's a little awkward to try and spend 5 mana on something like that, but slow to burst is a much bigger upgrade than I thought they were going to give. So I'm very excited to see what comes out of Iceborn Legacy, because even if you end up playing an Iceborn Legacy deck, what's really going to create some cool tournament highlight moments are the times that you don't go for the Daring Poros or the Spiderlings, when you go for something else, something that you wouldn't think to go for normally, and just play it as like a grant +2/+2 to this unit for this turn and swing a game. I think something like that could be really cool. So ultimately, I'm very excited to like cast Iceborn Legacy decks. So unironically, the Poro Herder change is actually really big, because now if you only open like Fabled Poro as your only Poro, you can still like search up your Daring Poro and get your Iceborn Legacy train going. Assuming that that's a real deck, I assume it's going to be at least a little real. Like the Freljord P&Z regional combination is really open in a tournament lineup, and I do think that like Iceborn Legacy Daring Poros are going to do something relatively spicy into the Ari decks, so see how that goes. Chump Womp as a 4/4 is interesting because, again, this is like another one of those nerfs from like a year and a half ago that is just being undone because the card has been power crept, which I like a lot, because there's a lot of other discard fodder in Piltover and Zon right now, which is why Chump Womp was run so often initially. I don't know that this is going to change too much for them. Maybe you'll start to see it in like Rumble decks, but because they already have, Rumble on 4 and Twin Blade Revenant on 4, I think Chump Wump, like, you can make this change relatively safely, and it's just going to still be power cut. But I do really like the initiative that the dev team is taking in undoing some of these older nerfs and seeing how they feel out. Aurelian Soul was like a big one to introduce us to it. Chump Wump is a relatively mild one. Trundle, again, like, I thought the A-Soul change was going to be a lot bigger than it ended up being, so maybe the Trundle change isn't going to be as big as I think it is. But the Chump Wump change, I'm pretty confident is like nothing. Coral Creatures, whatever. Drissoth cares. No one else cares. Ruined Rex is nice because, again, we're going from 3 health to 4. It's one of the biggest changes, is on top of the fact that it is now 4 attack as well, so it's a certified threat. And it triggers 6 times instead of 5. This is actually very close to being at Riptide Rex levels of power. Granted, you do have to draw 6 cards in the previous turn, but that's not super hard, right? We'll see how it goes because, again, hidden pathways to just take a nerf, so we'll see what kind of deck Ruined Rex actually fits into, but ultimately, I am pretty sure that Ruined Rex is not going to do anything in a tournament landscape. The card is a little bit too inconsistent to want to roll the dice on. Plunder got away with Riptide Rex for as long as they did because the field that original Riptide Rex Plunder played into was extremely mid-range heavy. Something like Ruined Rex, you're only dealing like 2 to a unit. That's not killing Ari. That's not killing Pantheon. That's level. That's not killing Shyvana. There's just a lot of things that you're missing out on there. And I think that while it's going to be a fun little ladder deck, I don't expect this to make any impact in the tournament scene whatsoever. Ascendants Rise got buffed. Cool. Mono Shurima has had more competitive success than you might guess, but I don't think Ascendant's Rise is really changing that, especially given the fact that, like, we're still in a pretty Ionia dominant meta. One of the big things to take away from the patch is that nothing was changed about Lee Sin. So while Lee Sin didn't put up any numbers on the previous weekend, Lee Sin always spikes at the seasonal, and none of the AKX decks are Targon, so you've still got Lee Sin Zoe completely open and playable. And with the TF Nami a little bit more out of the way, perhaps you're more willing to go for the Lee Sins again, because that was a deck that could just kind of like overwhelm you with win conditions, because Lee Sin, you get a challenge like 1 win condition a turn with the Lee and try to remove it that way. And if that gets, sort of stunted in any capacity, you were just in a really rough spot. So I think that like Lee Sin is still going to be extremely viable, which means Deny is still going to be everywhere, and Ascendant Rise is just not going to do nearly what you need it to do, even at 6 mana. And Karina Varaza as an 8/8, her stats were never the problem. It's a good buff for sure, because her stats did suck for a 9-drop, but It's mostly the deck building restrictions. I think Sentinel Control is just far and away a better way to do Piltover's on Shadow Isle than Karina Varaza is right now, and I've never seen Karina come close to being any kind of successful in a non-Shadow Isle deck, so I don't think this patch changes that at all. The Karina change, the Ascended Rise change, they're really nothing for tournaments. Again, this video is dragging on. These are, again, really nothing changes for tournaments. It's just not happening in this very power-crept environment. So the Vengeance buff, I don't think means too much in this meta right now, but I do think that it is the most important change in the patch for a couple of reasons. Number one, it really shows a little bit of a shift in Riot's design philosophy. Now, obviously, we've heard infinite times like, hey, you know, we don't want to buff removal too much because we want you guys to be playing a combat game, and that's what Legends of Runeterra was designed to be. But they've also said that there are certain hallmark region cards like Sharp Sight and Twin Discipline that they really like as is, and despite their high power level, they're pretty unwilling to nerf. So it's getting to a point where, like, we have these super powerful combat tricks, removal is getting power crept at every turn. Like, our hard removal does need to be a little bit cheaper, and I think the Vengeance change hard solidifies that Sharp Sight and Twin Disciplines are things that you should just stop thinking are ever going to be nerfed. We are going to continue to move in the direction of powerful combat tricks, but we are willing to buff removal to compensate it, which is really, really nice. So I know Ruben's a little bit worried about the Vengeance buff. Personally, I think it's a really good change, especially if Sharpsight and Twin Discipline are going to remain unchanged for the foreseeable future. So I'm very optimistic for this one. In the current meta, you know, I don't think the Vengeance is really doing too much. We're getting a lot of decks that are like very low to the ground, very like cheap go wide strategies, and Vengeance just really isn't doing too much. Bringing it in line for the cost with Minimorph is great, but at the end of the day, Minimorph is a little bit better than Vengeance in a lot of scenarios. So, you know, we'll see. I'm a little optimistic for it. You can double Vengeance in a turn. That's really cool. But yeah, you know, I think it's a very nice change, and I'm more excited for the philosophy that it brings with it rather than the specific change itself, because obviously, like, Shadow Isle has been the least played region competitively for quite some time, and Shadow Isle is always very swingy. If you look at the previous seasonals, Shadow Isle is usually either the most played region or the least played region. It is very rarely middle of the pack, and I really am not super optimistic for Shadow Isle, like, coming back in a huge way. The seasonal data will be a little bit skewed, assuming that, like, AK Go Hard is still existent in the form that it is, because obviously that is more Shadow Isle decks on the board, in the way that, like, Plunder triggered a resurgence of Freljord, where it's like, we play one Freljord card, this plays one Shadow Isle card. But that when you're tracking stats, at the end of the day, it is a deck with Shadow Isle in it. That's how you have to count it. But outside of AK Go Hard, I'm not, like, super optimistic for any Shadow Isle deck. I don't know that this really entices, like, Darkness to run it. I'm pretty sure they would max out on Minimorphs before they play any number of Vengeance. But maybe not. Who knows? Again, I think this is big for TLC, and I'm optimistic for TLC, but not, like, super optimistic. When I say optimistic, I mean, like, maybe it makes its way back onto my tier list. Maybe it's tier 3, but that's about as far as I would expect it to go. Maybe even tier 2, but definitely not tier 1. And then the final change, Hidden Pathways. This is the change that I think is sort of the biggest for TF Nami Shellfolk. You heard me talking earlier about, like, I don't think Shellfolk is the biggest nerf to this deck. I think Hidden Pathways is the biggest nerf to this deck. You know, not being able to freely clear your spell mana, needing to use a little bit more than that because now it's going down to 4 cost. A lot of people sort of memeing on the fact that, like, now this card is like Salvage and Whispered Words with downside. But I mean, when you're playing Vandal City, you were never playing this card for full cost anyway. So this is basically just a 4-mana draw 2, which is a fine card. It's not broken. I don't expect it to really go down on copies in any of the decks that I was playing in, but we've seen people looking for excuses to cut this almost. I mean, even like Bandle Tree players, we saw them try to play games without any Hidden Pathways or like only one Hidden Pathways, which was insane to me, but now they do have a little bit more justification behind that. But I like drawing cards. I think Hidden Pathways is still going to be fine. It is nice that at 4 mana, you're probably not just blind jamming it into every Vandal City deck, but we weren't really doing that anyway, so I don't know. Like, it's another one of those things where it's just a quality of life change. You're still going to play it at the number that you did previously, and it's just going to feel worse every time you do. But I do think that TF Nami is in a much rougher spot because of this Hidden Pathways change, and it'll actually be very surprising to me if TF Nami can maintain a steady presence, like 1 to 2 in every top cut, given how many nerfs it took this patch, especially as they started to adapt for Monster Harpoon and things like that. So, like, that's just one more nerf that they took. And the compounding mana cost of Hidden Pathways plus Monster Harpoon might be too much to run both of them. But yeah, that's the patch rundown. This was probably long. I haven't pieced it all together yet because I'm still doing the outro right now, but it is probably like a 30-minute patch rundown. So very much appreciate you sticking around for the end of this. And again, this is my tournament landscape patch rundown. I still like, obviously AKX is still very good. I think TF Nami moves down. Shyvana Pantheon is obviously going to be fine. Lee Sin probably makes its way back in there, and the big takeaways from this are, can Iceborn Legacy decks do anything in tournaments? Is TLC any good? Those are sort of the big ones. And Aikado has to find a new lineup, probably. Not even guaranteed. Those are like the 3 big takeaways from this as far as tournament landscapes go. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. My name is Boulevard. As always, good luck in your tournaments.